Get off!
If he was to walk in the room now, he'd make you laugh within 5 minutes. He'd say something, he'd pick up a glass, he'd do something. He was naturally gifted.
I couldn't watch. Yeah.
I did like the fact that I could make him laugh. That, I really did like that, because he had a great laugh, and it lit a room up.
I mean, the Eric Morecambe you saw on screen, that was him. That was him.
Sometimes I would find it irritating if you were trying to be serious and he wouldn't be serious. That could be irritating. But no, you just let Eric get away with murder, really.
He was so much the opposite of the untouchable star that by the time I met him, I already thought I had known him for a few years.
On the 27th of May, 1984, Eric Morecambe walked off stage in Tewkesbury to the familiar sound of a standing ovation. Seconds later, he collapsed, and the country lost the man it was later to vote the most popular comedian of the 20th century. Eric took his stage name from the seaside town of Morecambe in Lancashire, where he was born 75 years ago, the only child of George and Sadie Bartholomew.
People used to say about Eric, you'll never rear him, Sadie, because he was such a fragile-looking boy. She found out at a very early age that he was a dreamer. He wasn't interested in academic subjects, not at that time. He had a natural ability to entertain, and therefore she ought to do something with it.
She got him involved in music lessons, dancing, that type of thing, which he loathed at the time, he always claimed. But he was pretty good at it, and he developed a liking for it. And both he and his mother saw that that was an opportunity for him to get out of what could be described as a humble background. And she was there as the adult, once he joined up with Ernie, to look after two young lads who were only, what, 12 and a half, 13 years of age.
Hello, Aaron. My little fat friend. Can't see the joint. That's one of the best you've ever had. That is a beauty. Arrived this morning all the way from Axminster.
There's a bit of Phil Silvers there. There's a bit of Stan Laurel there. There's a bit of Lou Costello there. Yeah. And you can say this about almost any comedian, that there's a little bit of somebody there. And you can see comedians now, and you say, there's a lot of Eric Morecambe there.
If you do analyse what we do at all, you will see, I see a tremendous amount of Lowland Hardy. I used to watch Lowland Hardy when I was a kid, and Oliver Hardy. He was the first one ever to use a camera.
Yeah, that's right.
He always looked. Can you give me number 3? That's the one. He always used to go like that. Do you want... Do you want me? Do you want me to...
Eric was one of those people who, when he came out, I laughed. He didn't have to do anything yet. I would laugh more once he did something, but he just came out and he was a funny man.
Evening all!
He seemed to be ad-libbing, and he could ad-lib brilliantly if the occasion demanded, but he'd learnt every syllable. Always told Ernie off, because Ernie was always lagging behind learning the lines, but Eric had every I dotted and every T crossed before they ever did anything.
On.
Now, do you want me to stand at the back of here or go forward? Right there. Evening all. Sorry I'm late. Only I'm just having resolution squashed.
Well, there were lots of people in his room after a show, and I was at the back. Now, I don't drink, but I had a bottle of Tizer in my case. Now, I felt a little bit, didn't feel right about drinking Tizer when they were drinking champagne and whiskey. So I got the bottle of Tizer out, and I put my arm up like that. I had the Tizer behind my arm, and I was going like that. And Eric Morecambe was over on the other side of the room, and he saw me, and he went. And the next show we did, a flat sketch, he went over to the drinks cabinet at the run-through, got a bottle of whiskey, and went.
Put that whiskey down.
He remembered that gag from then, and he said that was good. I'll have. He didn't miss much. He was very observant.
You'd see him looking in the mirror, and he'd say to Ernie, "Ernie, can you give me that line again?" And Ernie would say the line, and he'd go, you know, he'd do his funny look. I can't do it, but it was an Eric Morecambe look, and he was a perfectionist.
He liked people to speak properly. If they were talking and they didn't sound the last letter, for instance, of words, he would always say, there's a T on it, it's that. It's not that, it's that. He'd always pull them up. Actually, he was very interested in the English language.
He savoured words. They were like a meal, a banquet, and he savoured them, and he got them all right. He got them inflection right.
What about this first edition of English poems?
Oh, yes. Very interesting. Oh, that's beautiful. She went to Spain, but never again. The men there drove her crackers. They stood beneath her window at night, shaking their maracas.
What I liked very much is that he never told a dirty joke, but he could make an innocent line sound so filthy, and once you examined it, there was nothing in it.
What is it I say? What is it I say? Hey. Welcome to Uncle Eric.
Uncle Eric and his little friend.
Then it pops out. Then it pops out.
Well, I haven't rehearsed that bit.
No, all right.
The child in him definitely shines through in his humour because it is innuendo rather than ever directly rude. I mean, I can see him sort of just giggling at the thought that something might be rude, but he'd never go there. He'd never take you there.
There's a hell of a smell in Dingley Dell. The pitchers are washing their socks. Up come two sailors, smiles on their faces.
Never mind about the sailors.
The unfinished limericks, he loved doing those, where you set up the knickers rhyme or whatever and never did the last line.
There was a young lady from Reading who saw us on the move in the bedding. She didn't half jump when she saw this big lump.
That's it!
Oh, you heard it, eh?
About the sailors.
He could touch the child within himself very easily, so there wasn't the generational gap thing. You didn't have that problem with him. He wanted to mix with you.
Well, I remember very well one of the first times that I ever went round to Gary's. We decided it would be brilliant to recreate Heathrow Airport in the hallway of the house. So we got all our model aeroplanes all over the hall, you know, and it was impossible to get through. And Eric comes sauntering down the stairs, and I thought, now we're going to get it, you know. And he just said to us, this is fantastic, you know, this is absolutely brilliant, but you've got to have a control tower. You know, the planes can't land or take off without a control tower. So he went off to the kitchen and he came back and said, right, this casserole dish can be the control tower, and we'll have the military aircraft over there because you've got them mixed up with the civilian aircraft and so on. And Joan would always be saying, leave the boys alone, let the boys play on their own. But he would always manage somehow to get in on what we were doing, and which I absolutely loved because he was actually brilliant with kids.
I think everybody that watched Eric would like to have gone up to him and gone, like that. Pinch his cheek like you would a little boy. You know?
I mean, Eric did have an innocent face, but strangely enough, when we had conversations in the rehearsal rooms about women or something, I found that Eric was more a man of the world than Ernie was.
I like you.
Hello.
Kiss me.
All right, then.
He loved the company of ladies. He felt that probably his greatest fans were the females.
I have a confession to make.
Really? What is it?
I will tell you. I'm not interested in girls anymore.
Why not?
Well, I think it dates back from the time that my braces got caught in the propeller.
I think he held women in a position of esteem, really. He adored my mother. We were always being told how beautiful she was, which she was, but, you know, he would suddenly say, look at your mum, look at your mum. Isn't she beautiful? Most beautiful woman in the world, she is. And we'd have all of that all the time, and I think he liked that about women. He liked femininity.
I rushed in one day straight from the West End, and I said, gosh, do you know this, whatever it was, cost me 30 quid? And he said, Anne, you're a lady. Do not use words like that. And I thought, quid? Quid? What's wrong with quid? What have I said? But he didn't like what he considered unsuitable language.
I put myself in the hands of a health food specialist, and the first thing he did was to cut off my carbohydrates.
Just watch it, that's all. He's only just turned 40.
A spade was always a spade. Everything was very black and white. I can't remember any grey areas. You're either a good guy, bad guy, you know, straight on, head on. And it was like that with the facts of life. Yeah, I mean, he literally one day just took his trousers down and said, these are dangerous things, son, you know, be careful. And that was it. That was the end of the facts of life story. You know, wonderful.
What you do? What have I done wrong now? I'm warning you about her. Remember that Lord Nelson sketch? I don't know what she did to you that night, but you had to push your bike home. Now remember. You stop.
In many ways, he was a very strict father. Manners were absolutely essential. You called everybody Mr. or Mrs. always. And he was very strict, but he couldn't be cross. So if Gary and I were clowning around or not behaving as he would like, he would start to say something, and then obviously a funny line would spring into his head, and we'd all end up killing ourselves.
He used to shy away from all responsibility. He didn't like responsibility. So to be the father who was trying to discipline his children was really a role he couldn't cope with. So what he used to do is he used to just get louder and louder, sort of ask us to do something. And then when we didn't, he'd turn to my mother and say, would you handle this? Bringing girls back was okay. I mean, he was a bit mischievous, but then he always was. You know, you could bring a girl back and he'd start asking questions that were always a little bit too personal for my liking, really. But I used to just go red or leave the room.
Boyfriends must have had a dreadful time. Dad would love to be part of the scene, so he would usually be there to greet them as they came in through the front door, and it was like being in the eye of a storm.
We had this thing, running gag in the end, that we could open a cupboard and he'd be in there and say, look, what are we doing now? He wanted to join in so badly. He loved that. He loved getting them to come into the sitting room to watch his shows. He thought that was a wonderful idea.
He may have been everyone's best friend, but Eric was also his own worst enemy. Relentless nervous energy and a 3-pack-a-day habit complemented a punishing work schedule, aggravating the damage caused to his health down the mines during the war.
Eric was only 42 when he had his first heart attack, and it was a massive heart attack, although it was greatly underplayed. And that was in, what, 1968, I suppose. Eric never really liked working nightclubs. The Batley one was a little bit different, was a little bit special. And he went up there from here, absolutely perfectly fit, nothing wrong with him. I think he had complained that his arm was aching a bit, but that was all, nothing wrong with him.
Now, funnily enough, I didn't realise, fortunately, it was a heart attack, you see, because had I thought it was a heart attack, I'd have had a heart attack and died. Because I always thought, you know, a heart attack was, you're behind. But it's just, you know, it's just like that at all. It's just...
Yeah, he wasn't sleeping a lot. He was working hard. He was travelling around. The adrenaline was being pumped out every night in front of a live audience of some many hundreds. And then when he wasn't doing that, he was smoking in between it. So it was a nightmare, a cycle he was on, that had to end with him or Ernie being ill. And it was him that fell ill.
How are you feeling? You're all right. You
great,
feel all right.
never felt
That's
better.
good. Yeah.
Eric and Des O'Connor were friends for years, so they go back an awful long way. It was only in the later years that the public caught up with the gag, when Eric started doing it in front of, 20 million people.
I said to him one day, I said, we're friends, but the public don't know we're friends. They think we're enemies. I said, one of my fans is really upset. He said, well, let me talk to the other one.
Louis Armstrong?
No, it's not Louis Armstrong.
Ellie Wallace?
No.
Oh.
Des O'Connor.
Joan Morecambe told me in the home in Harpenden one night, she went into his study and he had the pipe, had his shoes in the slippers on a chair, and he was listening to Des O'Connor records. Joan Morecambe told me that, and she said to him, oh, Eric.
I remember once when we were driving around in the Rolls Royce with him, me and Gary in the back, and he had these old 8-track cartridges, and I was looking down and I was thinking, well, there's Count Basie and there's Jose Feliciano, okay, and there's Frank Zappa, respect. To this day, I don't know whether he had it just to shock people or whether he actually genuinely liked it. I just have no idea. But there was always that slight element of the unexpected. You never quite knew what you were going to get.
He was never, ever bored. He used to say that his hobby was hobbies, because he had a dabble at everything, whether it was photography or collecting things.
Very keen in the 60s about doing painting, especially still life. How he liked doing sort of fruit bowls and jugs and things like that. Yeah, he was into all that kind of thing. He'd do one or two animal ones, I seem to remember. Yeah, no, he loved his painting, really did. But then, as with everything in his life, it tended to be a phase. The fishing was the only thing that remained constant, because he started that when he was a young lad with his dad up at Morecambe Bay. Right on the sands there. In front, ironically now, where the statue stands, him and his dad would be standing there with a fishing rod fishing.
Eric was never far from a fishing rod throughout his life, and in his later years took up bird watching. But sport was always his preferred means of escape.
It's my favourite game, cricket.
No, not mine.
No?
No, I like the straight left, the right hook, the uppercut.
Boxing.
Football. I love football, and I've always been interested in it. I would have been a schoolboy international, but I never went to school.
Connection with Luton Town Football Club came around following my father's first heart attack in November 1968. We both were keen on football, and because he had a lot of recuperation time, he thought, well, let's go and see some matches. And he literally tossed a coin, and heads Luton, tails Watford. And it came down heads, and off we went to Luton.
I used to sit in the director's box, watching the games. And the crowd all knew. And if we were 2-0 down at half-time, the whole of the cop, as such, would shout, "What do you think of it so far?" And I used to have to stand up and shout, "Rubbish."
Oh yeah, I mean Luton Town Football Club was the be-all and end-all. That was the outlet that Eric wanted. I mean that took him away from show business. That took him into a different era, being with footballing and sports people as against being with show business people.
I don't know how much he knew about the game. And I say that for the very simple reason that never, ever, ever did he speak about the game of football with us players. It was, don't talk comedy with me, and I won't talk football with you.
I'll tell you something that is funny.
What?
Luton Town football team.
He was a bundle of nerves when he watched a match. He would get through about 3 pipe stems a match. He would just totally destroy them in his mouth, chew them to bits. Which is why he had so many pipes in the end. I think he had about 60 or 70 pipes we found after he died in his drawer, all with chewed stems from where he'd been at matches. And when the opposing side were attacking, he just the break in his mouth.
Take that back, please.
No!
If you don't take that back, I'll bounce you around this room like a ping pong ball.
We were a winning side in the time that I knew. He would say, but how do you cope with losing? How do you cope with a defeat? How do you cope with missing an open goal? He had this fascination, which I suppose only hid a fear of failing. Because really, the only opponent that he had was himself.
Have you got a war wound on your left shoulder? A scar left by the spear of a fuzzy wuzzy? I only just remembered that. True, it's all based on fear. All comedy is based on fear, yes. It's the fear of failure. It's the fear of not getting a laugh, you know. You say, look, I am a comedian, and I am going to make you laugh, and you go out there and you don't. And that, your body takes a tremendous pummeling when that happens. It's terrifying.
Give us a hand.
No, it's
Yes,
all
sure.
right. No, I'm all right. I'll stay here.
I do believe that he thought that it could be taken away. And you have to bear in mind that when they did their first series for ATV, and you're talking like 1961, they were looking to maybe a series or 2 at the most. They didn't think it was going to go beyond that. So they were accepting everything, any adverts going, anything that was going, they would take, say, wow, make the most of this. Come 1963, will be forgotten.
It's a clear, cool ale is what this pail. Pass it on. Here, why do you drink it so fast?
I had one knocked over once.
Oh, it's a clear, cool ale is what this pail. Pass it on.
Eric, I know, because I knew him through the Lord's Taverners, would mostly refuse to get up and say a few words at things unless he was well warned, on his own, I mean. And then, even well warned, he didn't enjoy it, and it would be brief, because he felt lonely. There was something, because he'd always had somebody with him to tug or to correct or straighten his tie or pat his hair down or something.
That's the way he worked. I became very adept at it. In the end, I had to start feeding him, because we'd go out and he'd do the same gag again, and he'd expect me to be like Ernie, but he'd expect you to feed him automatically. It wouldn't be a case of saying beforehand, hey, I might do that gag later on. Now, remember it, and we'll do what we did last time. It's just in my head, and it just had to come out. And it did, because he was so easy to work with.
Eric, say hello to Mr. Preview.
Ah, Mr. Preview, how are you? A pleasure to be with you, and ready when you are. Come on! 1, 2, 3.
You got me here under false pretenses.
False pretenses?
False pretenses? What's he mean? What's he mean?
Well, I told you it wouldn't work. He's expecting Yehudi Menuhin.
He's a comedian.
And a very funny one, too.
It's interesting that when he got, say, Andre Previn, a third person, if you watch that very carefully, Ernie hardly does anything in that. Because Eric has to have one funny protagonist with him. He felt very confident about the relationship between Previn and he.
Eric had a theory that the people who would be funniest on his show would be the people who basically had no business being on it. He said, have you ever been on a comedy show before? And I said, no. And he said, well, the only thing I will tell you is, we three must never know that what we're doing is funny. He said, it'll only work if we're doing, you know, if we're doing it like King Lear. He was always perfectly respectful to me and what I did, but it didn't keep him from slapping me and picking me up off the floor and saying, "That's not the way it goes, sunshine." You know, so I think that people enjoyed that. I did.
I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order.
He thought funny. You know, he'd take something quite ordinary and with a pair of glasses, he'd have you rolling around. He was very physically funny.
He was a great little hoofer, that was for sure. I mean, he had a great way of pretending that he wasn't a good dancer, very angular in what he did very often. But also there was that wonderful sort of comic bend to his spine that he could do.
Be honest, come on.
If you watch them dancing sometime, you'll see that Eric gets a bit of comedy into the dancing. Ernie was very good at dancing, but Eric had that comedy way of moving.
And I'd like to be your sister, brother, dad, and mother too. Pretty baby, won't you come and let me rock you in?
I think Eddie Braben's the closest when he says that they were closer than any brothers that he's known. And I think that's true because my father would and did, in front of me, criticise Ernie on several occasions about certain things, certain bits of script, the way he handled it, or whatever. And then if you slightly joined in, he'd come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Yes? Oh, good. How long have you and I been friends?
Well, we've known each other for about 34 years.
Oh, yes.
And I would say during that time, we've been friends for about 20 minutes.
I had a line in the show once when Ernie had to go off for some reason or other. And Eric said, as he went off, "Don't be long because I go cold all down one side." And that was absolutely true.
You're welcome out now. I'm all right now.
The affection that you see, the look behind the eyes, you know, the camera was very close, and I think you can't fake that.
Hello, Ernie. Hello, Eric. It's so nice to see you back where you belong. You're looking swell, fellas. We can't tell. You're still growing. You're still growing.
What do you like being famous?
It's not like in your day, you know.
Swing, 'cause the band's playing one of your old favorite songs from way back when. So take a tip, fellas. Have a little lip from me, fellas. Ernie, don't you go away. Eric, don't you ever stray. Fellas, don't you go away again.
True, I've got a 12-year-old. Really, he's 28. I'm a bit worried about him.
In 1974, with his own children grown up, Eric found himself once more in touch with his younger side. Gail was now working in children's care and introduced her father to the boy he and Joan were to adopt, Stephen.
I just came back, and then one day I just started calling Mum and Dad, like Gail did, and I came back more or less so like every weekend.
It came down to me in the end. Would I take on the responsibility? Eric said, "You know, love," he said, "you're the one that'll do all the work, so you're the one that must make the final decision."
When I first came here, I had a barrage of swear words, and that's basically all my vocabulary consisted of was swear words. So I shocked a few people and got put into line eventually.
Stevie was a little Cockney kid, you know, had a very interesting turn of phrase. He jumped into the pool and he made used a word that would annoy Eric very much indeed. Oh, it's cold. And Eric would say to Joan, "Tell him, Joan,
Joan, tell him, please.
The favourite memories were coming in to Dad, kiss him goodnight. He'd sit me on his knee, and I'd have a smoke of his pipe with him, sip of his brandy, and a really good hug and a kiss, and then shoot off to bed.
Stephen was a very difficult little boy, actually. Lots of personality, but quite a difficult little boy to handle. And when Gail got married, he did surreptitiously go around, because we were in this big grounds, beautiful place, and so you sort of lost track of what he was up to, and he did go around finding all these glasses of champagne that just had little drops in the bottom, and he ended up tight. We had no idea.
Hey, come on. Sorry.
I just got very, very drunk. I was only 6 years old, and I got absolutely slaughtered. And Dad was making his big speech, and I went up to the stairs and was trying to cut in on his speech, trying to ask him a question.
The reason I'm sad is because through this wedding, tonight, I shall be going to bed with a mother-in-law. No, it's all right. I've worked with kids like that in Panto.
One Easter, I came in with this great big Easter egg. I showed it to Dad. I said, look what I've got. He said, great, can I have some? So I sat down next to him on a sofa, and I broke this Easter egg up into lots of little pieces. And he held it in his hand. I carried on putting all this Easter egg in, and eventually the whole egg had gone into his hands. I just stood there and I looked at him, and I said, well, I'll be going now. And he called me back, and he just burst out laughing, and he gave me the biggest cuddle ever, and he said, you can be so generous when you want to. I think he taught me that, and also how to be loving, because he was a very loving, caring person.
A little boy came up, and he said, can I have your autograph, Mr. Morecambe? And he looked at me and said, I never signed autographs on a Tuesday. And the kid looked absolutely, and turned and went about. He said, what day is it? The boy said, I don't know. He said, it's a Thursday. Oh, whatever it was. And of course he signed the autograph.
Mrs. Hall?
That's John Humphrey.
Oh, John Humphrey.
He clicked into action immediately. Anybody spoke to him. I could see him, revving up, and he would do jokes, and he would leave them laughing, and do it very well and very charmingly, but he didn't really want to. But he thought they're the customers, so they expected it, and it became like a knee-jerk reaction with him. Whatever anybody said, he immediately gave a funny reply.
Excellent. Everything works here. Everything works except me. So, you're not married then?
Eric was always aware that everybody recognised him. You couldn't help but recognise him. But there was just the odd occasion when he wanted to be ordinary. He would take his glasses off and walk with a limp, and nobody recognised him. He could walk through a crowd of people and nobody recognised him.
I can remember flying back from Miami with him once, and we got to Miami airport, and quite a few Brits were there, and he took off his glasses then and became a bit unusual, on himself, and it worked. And we got onto this very busy night flight, and we got on the plane, and then just after takeoff, when everyone undid their seatbelts, he then skip danced all the way up the plane through the curtains at the end, so that they'd know who he was anyway. Very strange like that, but I suppose that's what fame's all about.
I always feel that anybody who says, oh, don't bother me, and I don't want to be a star, and I don't want this, that, and the other, talking rhubarb. I mean, what are they in it for? They can only then be in it for the money, But I mean, to have success, I think, is absolutely fantastic. To be recognised.
When we were in Portugal, which we went to fairly regularly, of course, anyone that was British recognised him, and so he would get a certain amount of attention then. But if we went to, say, typical local little restaurant places, and people didn't know him, he would always fool around with the waiter. And the kids used to get embarrassed by it,
It became a challenge then to make them laugh. It became like a new audience. He enjoyed that more than someone English approaching him whilst on holiday saying, oh, hello, Eric, how are you? To have a waiter come up who didn't know him from Adam, and then making that waiter fall about laughing, which he did, invariably he could do that.
He would often be thinking about sketches, and certainly he would try things out. if he thought an idea had promise, then it would be, come on, girl, what do you think of this? And he'd perhaps have thought up some music, and he'd play the music, and then he'd start running through how he envisaged it. And certainly the Tom Jones sketch, where the two of them are dancing in the background, was definitely thought up in Portugal, and he ran that by me several times.
Why should we spend money on a show or two? No one plays those love scenes exactly like you. Exactly like you, you make me feel so bad. I wanna hand the world to you. You seem to understand. Each foolish little dream I'm dreaming keeps on dreaming.
On the rare occasions he was on the beach, he did lark about. And he did his acting bit as if he was, you know, on a desert island and gasping for water, and he'd be sort of hanging onto his throat, and then he'd be crawling along the beach like this.
You make me feel so glad.
He loved clowning about, but he didn't want to spend much time on the beach.
People that say to me, well, what's he really like? What's he like at home? You know, it might be disappointing, but that is what he was really like. You know, he would do things with his glasses. He would put his head round the door and grab his neck and all of that business. And he did want to leave a room with you laughing, even if you were his daughter or his son or whatever.
Once I was in his dressing room with him, and he started doing jokes. I said, for God's sake, Eric, you know, give it a rest, you know, lay back a bit. Just, you've done about half a dozen I've been in, and 2 of them were mine.
Have you got everything, Eric? I had the last time I looked, yeah. A couple of tarts for after tea? No, I'm staying in tonight.
All of a sudden, he whipped a paper bag out, and he went, hey, into the paper bag. And he could do that on occasions. And I thought, well, why'd you carry an empty paper bag around in your pocket?
He just kept on going, he just wouldn't stop. He just kept on going. We did talk about the pressures of the job, and we should take it easy and maybe cut down on this and cut that, but we didn't.
And with a weak heart, that could only mean one thing. In 1979, the inevitable happened, and Eric suffered a second heart attack.
He said I caused it, which he did, he said that. But yes, I was standing next to him, and he opened the fridge door. Probably saw the lights or something and fell over, yeah. But that was, I thought he just fainted, but then he got up and we sat him down and a glass of water. He said, I think I'm having a heart attack. I was like, no, you're not. You can't be. You know, you have one of those. You've done that.
Between his first heart attack, this massive heart attack he had, and having his operation, he had several minor, sort of small heart attacks when he was rushed off to St Albans Hospital, and he duly recovered and would come back and be fine again.
What's the doctor's verdict, though? You've got to...
Very good. Very good. I'm not really here at the moment. I am a recording.
He's going to rest.
I've got to rest.
Weeks.
For a couple of weeks, is it?
Several.
Several.
It was never like being with an ill man. It was all very unbelievable. I was at home when he came back from seeing Magdi Yaqub, who told him that if he didn't have a triple bypass, he had 6 months to live. And, I mean, even Dad's response to that, apparently, was he looked at his watch and said, well, what are you doing this afternoon?
Good luck. Yeah, intensive care unit, please. See ya. Bye-bye.
Even that somehow didn't penetrate. You still didn't think, this is a man who's got to now take it easy and be careful.
When I was 9 or 10, I realised he was ill and there was a problem there and everything like that. So a couple of times we were told to take it a bit easier with him, not to rough him up too much.
He had the triple bypass, and that in itself was an 8-hour operation. They only sort of half expected him to come through that. But he did, and, you know, fought back and came out again and worked again.
Obviously, ladies and gentlemen,
That's obviously ladies and gentlemen. Hey? What's he say? What's he say then? What?
I'd like to thank
I'd like to thank
Ross Abbott.
Ross Abbott?
Actually, you started writing books, didn't you, in hospital, as a bit of a bet, I think, with your wife.
Well, it was just before I went into hospital, yes. I started to write the Mr. Lonely, and I said, I've got nothing to do before the operation. I'm going to write this book. And she said, ah, yes. That's why I was full of confidence when I like that.
I think he enjoyed writing all kinds of things because he'd been a writer all his life, writing scripts. But because he'd had no formal education, he didn't think he could actually write books.
Eric proved himself to be a talented writer and found an audience in both adults and children. But sadly, he was never to complete his second novel.
I think he knew on one level that he was not going to make Old Bones. I think he'd worked out what the chances, how many years he'd have after a triple bypass. So I think he'd worked out that, you know, well, I've had 2 years, I've probably got 5.
There's nothing wrong now. The only thing I've got to do is just keep taking the pills and relax a bit. And don't try and get into laughs, that's all there is to it. I shouldn't have done that. I knew I shouldn't have done that.
Before he had the operation, Eric wrote me a letter, sealed it down, put it in his drawer, and said, if anything happens and I don't come through this, you are to open it. And it sat there for years after he'd recovered, and this was still there. And just before he died, he said, well, we won't need this anymore, and he tore it up. And he died a fortnight afterwards. So I would like to have known what he put in it. Yeah, I always had a curiosity, because I'm sure it would have contained some very nice things. Because he used to say to me, he said, you know, love, he said, if anything happens to me, you've got nothing to reproach yourself with. He said, I've had a marvellous life. He said, I've had a marvellous life, he said, you've been a wonderful wife, he said, a great family. He said, nothing to reproach yourself with. Then he would say, you shouldn't waste yourself, you know, you ought to get married again. And I said, I shall never marry again. And he was really pleased that I said that. And he went off absolutely chuffed. Oh, she's never going to get married again if anything happens to me, you know.
You will be quiet. You were the one that took shouting all men. What was you?
The weekend that he died, we had this wedding with family friends. And when I arrived, Dad came through the kitchen door as I was coming the other way, and we completely communicated on 2 levels. So I looked at him and I said all the things you say, like, hello, Dad, you know, how are you, and blah, blah, blah. And on another level, we just made eye contact, and I knew and he knew.
I did say to him, and I wish that I'd been more forceful about it, I said that it's a terrible thing to do to cancel at the last minute, but don't you think we should cancel this concert, this thing you're doing with Stan, because you're just not well enough. And he said, oh, he said, you know me, love. He said, I couldn't possibly do a television at the moment. That would be too stressful. But he said, I shall enjoy this. He said, it'll be lovely, old times, you know.
He was funny beyond belief that night, as if it was like, as if it was a man possessed, really. Everything he said was funny. He'd laugh, got big, you know. He was right on the top of his form that night.
And he held the audience in his hands as if it was a comedy, which it wasn't. It was a straight thing, and they were absolutely spellbound. It was absolutely brilliant.
No, we certainly couldn't see it coming. He looked so great. I mean, I look at pictures now of him on that night. I only can't believe it. I mean, he looks as healthy, certainly looked healthier than I did.
The comedian Eric Morecambe, who made millions laugh for more than 40 years, has died. He collapsed last night after giving a charity performance at Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire. He told the audience he was proud at having undergone open heart surgery and was grateful for the extra years he'd won. He was 58.
On one occasion, he did say to me, you know, Gail, if anything ever happens to me, you've got to look after your mother. He said, it's going to be very difficult for your mother, and I want no tears. And I just said, well, you know, that's easier said than done. Actually, both of them are easier said than done, looking after my mother and no tears. And he said, you know, you've got to keep watching the shows and you've got to think of me and smile, otherwise it's all been for nothing. You know, what was it all for?
Hello, Charlie. How are you? I'm very well, thank you. Are you really? Yes. And what are you going to do for us tonight, Charlie? Well, first of all, I thought I'd tell you a few jokes. Take all my clothes off and show you my bare wooden...
Just a moment. I can see your lips moving.
Of course you can, you fool. Because it's me who's doing it for him.
I still find that I have a surplus of Eric around the house. And I know that I ought to get rid of fishing rods, and even his old fishing jacket and his fishing hat. And there's a load of ties upstairs. There's even his shoes. It's ridiculous, really, I know. And, I don't know. What does one do with a whole box of shoes now?
The thing I think I miss most about him is just hearing his voice and knowing when I have conversations with people like my mother and my sister that he's not going to come in with a very silly comment at the end of it. I really miss that. We tend now as a family to have sensible conversations. The ones that we used to say, oh, Dad, be quiet, you know, to have. Well, now I wish it was the other way around and that he could come in with the funnies all the time.
England, having stormed into an impressive 4 legs to 1 lead, were hauled back by the never-say-die Welshman. So much so that with just 2 legs to play...
The last time I saw anything like that on top lip, the whole herd had to be destroyed.
The last time I saw Eric before he died was just a few weeks before it happened. And so we were chatting, and I said to Eric, I said, you know, I don't think I've ever seen you look so well. I said, you really are thinner. He said, I've got a new diet. I said, have you? I said, what? He said, I never eat when the wife talks.
I miss him, most of all. I miss growing up with him, my teenage years and everything. I just missed a person.
He was the bee's knees. If he was around today, he'd still be funny. And he would have known, I think, when to say goodbye. So I think he would have been still comic's comic.
I thought that since he was timeless in his comedy, I thought he was timeless in his persona. I could never visualize the fact that Eric Morecambe was gone. He was a fixture, you know. It's like suddenly hearing that, I don't know, they took Westminster Bridge away. It's impossible.
Bring me sunshine in your smile. Bring me laughter all the while. In this world where we live, there should be more happiness, so much joy you can give to each brand new bright tomorrow. Make me happy through the years. Never bring me any tears. Let your arms be as warm as the sun from up above. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring me love.